Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We are very happy to have you here at another edition of Discovery. My name is Alison Mostowich, and I am the Director of Engagement at Efficiency Canada. Efficiency Canada operates within Carleton University, and we acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. In doing so, we also acknowledge that we have a responsibility to the Algonquin people and a responsibility to adhere to Algonquin cultural protocols. I personally am joining you from Mohkinstsis, which is the Blackfoot word for Calgary, meaning elbow. So the area where the Elbow and the Bow River meet in Calgary has long been an important gathering place to share stories, create community, and build futures amongst tribes in the area. So I hope you'll share with us where you're joining from in the chat. For those of you joining us for the first time, Efficiency Canada hosts Discovery every 2 weeks. The sessions are meant to bring together the sector as well as anybody interested in energy efficiency together to learn. We try to highlight new research, findings from pilots, and relevant topics. So before we get started, just a reminder to everybody that our speakers will present for about 20 minutes, and then we will open the floor to questions. So you can use that little button at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a QA button. You can share your questions in there as they're going through the presentation, and you can actually upvote questions as well. So if you like a question, then it's got a higher probability of getting asked. So with that, I will introduce our speakers today. So with us today, we have Hugh MacDonald, who is the Senior Director of Information and Analytics with EfficiencyOne. And we also have Winston Morton, who is the Chief Executive Officer with Climative. They partnered on a remote home energy assessments pilot, and they're going to share the results today. So thank you so much for being here, Hugh and Winston. I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thanks so much.
And I'll share my screen.
Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. And thanks to Efficiency Canada for having us for this topic. And Winston and I are here to talk about our results of our home energy assessment pilot that we conducted in 2022. I'm going to be whipping through some of this stuff pretty quickly because we want to leave lots of time for questions and answers at the end. But there has been a lot of momentum around this topic of remote or at least non-traditional types of assessments over the past few years. And so, this is what we're going to be covering today. So just briefly give an overview of our respective organizations. I'm going to hand it over to Winston, and he's going to give some background around some of the challenges in the industry and why we feel some of these methods can help with those challenges. Talk about, clearly define what we mean by remote assessments. There is some confusion in the industry around terminology, so I want to make sure everybody understands what we mean by remote audits or assessments. Then we'll get into research design and, most importantly, some of the results that we've seen from this pilot. And as I said, we want to leave lots of time for questions and answers. So I think we've done introductions and a bit about EfficiencyOne. So we're a Nova Scotia organization, and our purpose is to transform the way people use energy. We are Canada's first and only, I still think we're the only regulated energy efficiency utility in Canada. We're regulated by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, and our mission really is working with Nova Scotians to help them achieve their energy goals. And we're very proud of some of the things we've been able to achieve over the years. Some of these statistics are shown here. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Winston.
Thanks, Hugh. And I think EfficiencyOne's always in the top 1 or 2 of the organizations in the country on delivery of programs. So great to work with EfficiencyOne on this project. And thanks, Alison, and everyone for inviting us. Climative we provide data platform that focuses on providing tools for homeowners and service providers to either both build and design programs as well as deliver home energy programs. So a lot of times we'll call our plans basically low carbon plans for a home, and we've completed over 5 million digital assessments in Canada, identified more than 55 megatons of CO2 savings, and we've covered over 680 municipalities. So a little bit of background on the kind of the problem we're working on. So we all know, I think we're preaching to the choir today, buildings make up 18% of GHG emissions in Canada. Less than 1.5% of buildings get retrofitted annually. That number is a little surprising to folks new to this industry. We've only evaluated about 12% of the building stock in the past 20 years in Canada. So we do have some customer barriers. We have lots of conversations to start with customers, and Uncertainty of benefits and the costs of retrofits or lack of knowledge is a really big burden for a customer to know what to do next. Energy advisors are included. So we work closely with the energy advisors in the area for this particular pilot. And so there's a lot of pressure on our energy advisor community to cover the amount of buildings we need to cover in the programs that we have. And most importantly, if we stay on the trajectory we're on today, it's going to take us 90 years to cover the building assessments that we need to do, and around $700 million to do the evaluations. So what are digital assessments? So we use existing on-site audits to train machine learning models. We take property assessment data, which is available right across the country, and we create low carbon plans. We do have geospatial awareness in our platform, which means we can run separate models and separate programs by geospatial boundary. That means you can, for any city or any province or any jurisdiction, we can segment off the platform and run programs locally. What's in a carbon plan? So energy label, carbon score, energy use breakdown, retrofit recommendations, the impact of those recommendations, and we can pre-match rebates and offers. This is an important slide from the point of view of how we approach the data models. So we go from 4 levels of data models. All of these data models use standard defined data roles. In other words, level 1 right to level 4 use the same data fields. So in Canada, HOT 2000 is the most prevalent software out there. We're compatible with HOT 2000 fields even at level 1. So the virtual no-touch audit we can do en masse. We can do over 1 million assessments a day using property assessment data. That's good for program design. We do often get engaged with customers on program design. Level 2 is a survey-based audit. What we're talking about today is level 3, which is the remote energy audit. And so we always use registered energy advisors to do the level 3 audit because that experience is super important. And of course, level 4 is on-site. So we're compatible with the on-site data models as well. And I think I'm going to hand it back over to Hugh at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. So this is a high-level overview of how we conducted the pilot. And yeah, as Winston mentioned, so we're kind of flipping between terminologies here, so I'll try to align the terminology. So first thing we did, we for about 1,000 homes, we used Climative's platform to develop a level 1 assessment or a virtual assessment. And we it was a purpose-built report that homeowners could view. We invited them through an email, these 1,000 or so homes, to view their virtual assessment or level 1 assessment. The report was very simple, used plain language, 1-page summary, gave them the overview of how their home was using energy, how they compared to other comparable homes, and some other information on there, such as links to Efficiency Nova Scotia programs, et cetera, and so forth. And from there, the second phase of the study was to invite those homeowners to participate in a video audit or a remote audit or a level 3 audit, as Winston described. We used, again, purpose-built video technology for that. We used Iris CX is the company we used, and it worked extremely well. So for those 85 homes, the key to this research was all participants agreed to do a video audit, but also a traditional audit as well. So we'd have an exact comparison of data points for each and every home in the study. And again, there was a purpose-built report that homeowners who took part in the video assessment received, which is a snapshot of which is shown here on the screen. Again, very simple language, stripped down, and very simple instructions with relevant links to EfficiencyOne's programs, but also clearly articulated recommendations for the homeowner, and including some things such as like estimated payback times and return on investment and things like that, things that are really relevant for homeowners. And so that was an important piece to the research as well. And the very high level, what we're trying to test in this study, the goals here were to demonstrate technical credibility of this method, but also the effectiveness of this method to accelerate upgrades in the building stock. Yeah, and so fine, Winston, thank you. And so to the kind of the chase here. And so the first KPI, key performance indicators, that this is showing is around like the technical merits of the method. And so we've got very compelling results, as you see here. So the virtual assessment that was done, or the level 1 assessment, again, Winston already mentioned this, but very few data points. The estimates were based on data we had on homeowners in Nova Scotia at EfficiencyOne. We're very rich in data. We have a lot of data on homeowners. We were able to get, with that virtual or level 1 audit, within 77% of a traditional audit. And by that meaning comparing to the total annual energy usage that is produced by the HOT 2000 software from a traditional audit. And so that's pretty good with no input from a homeowner or any interaction with an energy advisor. Moving from that, for the 85 that did the video audit, we were able to improve the accuracy of the estimate to 84%. But more importantly, so even though we didn't get a huge jump, we're starting to see diminishing returns around the increase in the accuracy or the comparability of the estimates. What it does do, obviously, is give us way more information about the home so that we can make more informed recommendations from the remote audit piece. So that's hugely important. And then the final data point here that we're showing on the slide is, again, related to recommendations. We wanted to show how comparable we get in recommendations from a video audit versus a traditional audit. And so that 93% is a data point that shows how comparable we were on average across those 85 homes. So we got, I say, up to 93% ability, or we made 93% of the time, up to 93% of the time, the recommendations we made from a video audit were the exact same as what were made in a traditional audit. And yeah, a few other, so that was like the technical merits of the pilot. So these metrics here are showing more of the, say, the customer journey metrics and some of the other objectives around how's it going to impact our capacity of registered energy advisors. And the very first one here, this 3-to-1, is showing how many remote audits or video audits we can do compared to a traditional audit based on the time it takes to complete a remote audit versus a traditional audit. And that's everything. That's all the paperwork and administration and the modeling, et cetera, and so forth, and filling out the paperwork. Yeah, we can do 3 remote audits to 1 traditional audit. Second number here is showing customer satisfaction, very high, as you can see. So the video software had a way to ask, it had a customer satisfaction question in there that they could easily fill out. And we got 9.5 out of 10 for those that filled that out. About 30% of qualify that because only 35% of the participants actually gave their satisfaction rating, but nonetheless, that's still a very good number. 30 minutes is about, on average, the time a video audit took. So the amount of time an energy advisor was actually on the video call with the homeowner, 30 minutes. And the one thing about that I just want to note is that the other benefit of a remote audit in this way is that when you're on a video call, the energy advisor is in contact with the homeowner for the entire time because the energy advisor is guiding the homeowner through their home. And so the homeowner is very engaged, is what I'm saying. Whereas maybe even more engaged because it's, you can't go have a coffee while the energy advisor is doing their work. It's just an important side note there, I think. And then in terms of enrollment, so this is comparing the enrollment rate for remote audits in this pilot compared to what I'd say would be a traditional email campaign at EfficiencyOne that we use to try to enlist participants in a regular and traditional on-site program audit. So big bump in enrollment rates. Now, I will qualify this as well in the sense that the timing of this was right around the time of the pandemic. You read into that what you will, but I still think directionally, we're seeing a huge increase in customer engagement as a result of the remote audits compared to a traditional audit. I'm not going to go through all this. The main point of this was just one point here is that the key thing on this is an example of how a process mapping would work for or guidelines of how a remote energy assessment would happen. And the key thing here is that there's 3 points here where at any time, if the energy advisor feels based on the remote audit, they need a traditional audit, then that would happen. So it's not like to Winston's point at the beginning, this is about complementing traditional audits, not about replacing it. There will always be instances where you need a traditional on-site audit, but there's lots of instances where you don't. And so that was the point of this slide. Yeah, so I'm just wrapping it up here. Time check. So strengths and weaknesses. We found, obviously, so Winston touched on the ability to do mass assessments with their platform. We can also actually estimate very easily using Climative's platform actual energy usage. Distinction from, say, EnerGuide and the HOT 2000 approach, which uses standard operating conditions estimates, which obviously could be useful in certain situations. The customer access to video recording. The video recordings are there for the customer to refer to at any time. If they had a question about one particular part of the assessment, that they could go click into their video and go to the point in time of the audit where they had a question. It's a user-friendly report, again, custom purpose-built. Yeah, and I think the data shows that it's comparable with the existing on-site data standards. Of course, some of the drawbacks of this approach are well known. It's very difficult to determine the current state, insulation levels in the building cavity, for example. You can't do an air leakage test, obviously. It does require technology from customers. Now, it's very simple to use, but nonetheless, it does require a certain level of technology savvy customers for this to work, and they have bandwidth and Wi-Fi, strong Wi-Fi signals, etc. And it also requires new training for energy advisors. Not going to, it's more benefits summary. I won't go through all this in the interest of time, Winston, but I'm assuming this will be made available to all the participants so they can go through them. But yeah, I mean, one thing is customer convenience and choice, etc., lower cost, and as this mass planning tool, among other things. And so the takeaways, so very compelled, we felt that this was a very worthwhile research, very happy the way it went, very happy to be working with Climative on this. We feel like we got some really strong results going forward. And I guess the takeaways out of all this research is that we feel there's a role for remote audits to be used more broadly in the industry. Like I'll say the accuracy, but the comparability that we found is pretty solid. So the technical merits are there, benefits are compelling. And I know that this is taking off, like for labeling across the country. So continue designing and employing these methods across the country. Jurisdictions are using them now for labeling in various jurisdictions. But EfficiencyOne, we're going to be looking at ways of rolling it out more broadly in operations for where we can. And then finally, Winston, I know, is very much pushing for this concierge idea, but the building labeling piece as well there's huge potential for this, for building and labeling across the country. I think, Winston.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so I think we'll open it up for questions. We're about 21 minutes in. That's awesome. I will say, just a comment on the last point. We believe, and I think one of the major benefits of this is it provides more face time with help to homeowners. So it allows the energy advisors to spend more quality time, like you mentioned. And we also believe that it opens up new opportunities because we can do this at larger scale, lower cost, and more user-friendly. So we think that there's going to be opportunities to provide this through municipalities and PACE programs and through energy labeling programs, be able to provide more advice to more customers, number one. Number two, we'd be very happy to see the conversion rates of on-site audits go up. In other words, provide more information to homeowners earlier in the process. So when they do that on-site audit, the result is a substantial project. So yeah, that's my only comments. The other thing I will mention is we don't have time today to do a full demo, but we'll make a demo available, I think, in a week or so. So I'll leave this up on the screen. If you want to scan to register, we'll schedule a separate demo for anybody that's interested. Back to you, Al.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And I wanted to say too, I'm really appreciative and grateful that you're both here to share these pilot results with us. Pilots are a really important way to test how we can improve energy efficiency delivery in this country. And I encourage, if there's anyone else on the line that has pilots or has run pilots that they'd want to share the results of, get in touch with me. It's really important for spreading that knowledge and doing it better. So thank you both for being here today. Let's get started with questions. I do have a question just from my own perspective. What about demographic information? Were you able to track any of the demographic information about who was really interested in this style of auditing?
That's a great question, Allison. I have to check on that. Demographics, not so much, but more around like building characteristics and heat type and that kind of thing. But it's a good question. We could actually maybe infer some of that from the video audits if we had access to them. But I don't think explicitly we dug into the demographics, but it's a great question.
Yeah, so I think one of the outcomes, and we had an earlier webinar more with the energy advisors participating, is older homes. With particularly older homeowners, this was a more difficult process because the homes weren't built to a more reliable code, for example. So I would say that would be one of the things that we learned in the project is you may have categories of homes that you might lean more towards physical audits than others.
That's great information. Yeah. And I'm sure there are quite a few administrators on here that would be interested in learning more about demographics. That might be something we'll be able to connect some of our administrators on in the background in the future, if that is of interest to anyone. So just a reminder, as we get into this Q&A period and get into the good stuff, put your questions in the question and answer box down there. And if you see one you like, make sure you upvote it. And let's keep going. So we have a question about the HOT 2000 and just mentioning that HOT 2000 does have some inaccuracies as well. With their specific program, they had to apply significant adjustment factors to what NRCan results show for savings. So they're wondering if you had to validate against H2K in terms of the billing information.
Yeah, you and I can probably both comment on that. So we do use billing data, which is different, right? So we have operational data available to this. So we can correct the advice in real time according to billing data. And it's commonly used in the industry to actually compare HOT 2000 against actual billing data. So when we do third-party assessments, that's a very common way to evaluate the software. So to some degree, we can do that in real time. Our results are adjusted as we get billing matched. So we call that operational data versus physics-based models. So you're absolutely right. 100% match to HOT 2000 doesn't necessarily mean 100% correct to the customer, right? All the time.
I'll just add to that. I don't know if this is putting a finer point on your question, but we didn't use the remote audits data for evaluation at EfficiencyOne. It was just purely research based. But for our programs that use HOT 2000, we do have to adjust those estimates based on billing analysis and from advice and direction from our third-party evaluator.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So this question has gotten a lot of upvotes. So let's go here next. Do you think energy regulator incentive programs will accept this virtual audit instead of a traditional audit to unlock incentives in the future? We were having a conversation before we started about this. Love to hear your thoughts on it.
I can start, Winston. I mean, these are just my own personal views, but I see a groundswell of conversations happening at a lot of different levels for the use of these. And so I think it's a matter of when, not if, in the future. That's based on my own observation. I mean, our goal for this research was to provide a scientific, basis to help make these decisions along with all the other evidence that's mounting out there. And so I know there's drawbacks, yeah, but I think the evidence is starting to show this is a pretty compelling method, at least for some. Like we've been in 60,000 plus homes in Nova Scotia, and we have very detailed data from the EnerGuide assessments, like rich, deep, detailed data. And there are half of the homes that we're in probably good candidates for a remote assessment versus a traditional assessment. And I'll say especially, we have to do two audits, one before upgrades and one after upgrades in order to qualify for rebates. There's a vast number of instances where for the second audit, we shouldn't need to send an auditor on site based on the upgrades that are done. So I guess my point is there's such a compelling reason to use this. The decision makers are starting to realize that, but that's my personal view.
Yeah, and maybe I could think to hope. We would hope that's going to be considered for future programs. We work really closely with NRCan and our peers in the industry to make sure that the standards are there and it's an open approach. You know, the industry in general needs to speed up, and digitization is one of the ways to speed up the industry. Yeah, we're hopeful that digital audits will be included. Now, it may be components of the program. There may be more fit for certain portions of retrofits, for example, that would have clip rates, for example, that would be used.
Fantastic. Thanks both. So I think maybe let's go to, just trying to think of which question would be a good builder on that one. You had mentioned some data about costs in here. We have a lot of people that join us from, I would say, administrators, but also from like homeowner consultant perspectives and even trade perspectives. Can you break down the cost a little bit? You said I think it saved costs in terms of homeowners and energy audits and potentially even for program savings. Are you able to break that down a little bit?
The costs we focus on were basically around delivering the audit so the costs we looked at were what we at Efficiency Nova Scotia pay energy advisor organizations to do traditional audits compared to what it took to license Winston software, to license the video software, and then equating that also to the time it takes to complete a remote audit, fully loaded, including all the paperwork, et cetera. So that 3-to-1 statistic that I had on the screen earlier, that's kind of directly comparable to the costs to deliver a remote audit versus a traditional audit.
Yeah, I would agree, Hugh. That's probably in the range.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So this question is about building labeling, and you use the term building labeling. So I think some people are interested in understanding how this could potentially help building labeling. And if you could just talk generally about what building labeling is, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we probably threw that term out without really defining it. So NRCan has a mandate, the minister has a mandate to support building labeling across the country in Canada. In this last mandate letter, interestingly enough, the legislation is not with the federal government, it's with cities or provinces. So the federal government has reached out and created a program for pilots and deployments of building labeling across the country. So a number of provinces and cities across the country are pursuing that. Some of them, I don't know if all of them have been announced yet, but there's been a number. I would say we're upwards of half of the population looking at building labeling, and building labeling is at point of sale. So if you buy or sell a home in these jurisdictions, you're going to need to get your home scored. And so you can imagine that if we have to score homes at point of sale, it's roughly double our capacity of what we're doing for evaluations for retrofits today. So how do we have a workforce that can do that? We're going to have to probably find a way to do it more digitally and more enhanced. There's more parties involved, real estate agents, municipalities. And so the building labeling projects that we're involved in, we're also pre-assessing the entire market and providing fairly rich tools to the homeowners even before they sell a home. And every building labeling program that we know about is going to start voluntary before legislation.
Thanks, Winston. Anything to add to that, Hugh?
Just add that I know that Natural Resources Canada has struck a working group nationally to discuss this, of which I'm a part.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so next question. What is the state of the art on remote audits in multi-unit residential and commercial buildings? Have you seen that being used anywhere yet?
Yeah. So we do commercial, but commercial requires more on-site early assessments, right? So you'll need some on-site capacity in commercial buildings. Multi-dwelling units are a little easier because they're a little bit more comparable. But once we hit the commercial side with many different use cases and archetypes, so it's the front end to provide a digital audit requires some on-site work. And in Canada and the US, another piece of software called Portfolio Manager is used very commonly. So most jurisdictions in Canada that require, again, mandatory building labeling in commercial, which is quite well understood and been deployed for many years in some provinces, requires hot Portfolio Manager. And we work with Portfolio Manager in that context.
Fantastic. That's great to know. Thank you. So this question is interesting because I was wondering about it myself, and I'll ask this first, and then maybe I'll ask a little bit more of a contextual question. So this question is about fenestration. So windows and doors, for anybody that doesn't know what fenestration means. And sort of saying in the older homes, it's an obvious need for upgrades. Is there a checklist when you're doing this work of product conditions that you're specifically watching for? How does that play into remote audits?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the areas that as the remote auditors engage, they're going to be keeping an eye out specifically for that, right? So watching, a really good one is it's not always apparent on the ducting and HVAC systems, even when homeowners give us some extra input. We really do rely on the energy advisors to keep an eye out for that. So the condition of the home, I would say, would be one of the evaluations early in the video audit to say, you know what, this home really should have an on-site, really should have an on. So back to Hugh's off-ramp or on-ramp conversation.
But I think the topic of air tightness and things like that is, it's obviously a drawback of remote audits, but things like there are areas where remote audits work quite well, such as like insulation and headers and basements and things like anything that's, the homeowner is safe to go down and show the advisor on the other end of the line. I guess so it's tricky, but yeah, in those instances where it works well, but the off ramp is always a traditional audit. But that was one, windows and doors was one of the categories of the recommendations that we made as part of this pilot. So we didn't mention that in the pilot, but the recommendations fell into, Winston, maybe help me if I forget one, but it's windows and doors, it's ceiling insulation, wall insulation, basement insulation, including the header, and heating.
HVAC, yeah. And we do actually estimate air sealing as well. So we do recommend air sealing. Again, it has lots to do with the age of the home and the construction and the year of, because if you think about the year of the home, it has a lot to do with the building codes at the construction time. So we've trained, we have access to quite a lot of rich data across the country from an on-site assessment perspective. So you can do some pretty good estimates that way across the whole spectrum of buildings.
It's really interesting that you got there, because that was the next question I was going to ask, was about air sealing, and it's been uploaded quite a bit in the questions. So how do you factor in the air tightness testing if done as part of the upgrade to plug leaks instead of as the pre and post audit?
Well, we do estimate air leakage, and I think one of the things Hugh and EfficiencyOne realized is air sealing was almost always recommended to a homeowner anyway. We would almost always recommend air sealing for a certain category of home at an age, I think it was less than 10 years or more than 10 years old, something like that. It was a business. But so I would say it's always a good idea. Do you have a comment on that?
I guess I'm trying to read between the lines of the questions here because it comes up so often, but it's the safety factor that always is part of that question, I think. You can't make a home too tight because of air quality issues. And so if you can't do a blower door test, you're not going to get accurate depiction of whether a homeowner should be recommended ventilation equipment after they make their home tighter. And so we looked into that from a data perspective. So that's a valid concern for sure. However, looking into the data of the 60,000 plus homes we've been in, there's certain criteria from the readings of a blower door test that tell an advisor whether or not they should recommend a ventilation system to a homeowner during the first audit. So based on the readings of the blower door test, if there's a certain reading, best practice is for the advisor to recommend a ventilation system if they take all the upgraded recommendations on building envelope. We found that number one, that's not happening a lot, meaning ventilation is not getting recommended a lot compared to the math when it should be recommended, I'll say. And there could be various reasons for that. Like math is just math. It's a naive kind of thing. And so the energy advisor might have different reasons why they wouldn't recommend ventilation. But the second piece of that is even when ventilation equipment was recommended by an energy advisor, very few homeowners actually install it. And so anyway, that's just the reality. That's what's happening. And so it doesn't appear that there's a huge broad-based safety issue associated with air quality happening as a result of, otherwise, because we've been in so many homes and it's a minute number of homes that actually installed ventilation equipment after upgrading their insulation. And to my knowledge, we've gotten no kind of complaints, or there has been no safety concerns raised by homeowners as a result of that. So take that for what it is, but it's a valid concern, but the data that we have doesn't show this as a huge issue.
Thank you both. And I think that leads really well into our next question. So someone's just asking to have a bit of an expansion on the concierge program. And I think part of this is doing remote audits, but part of it is also supporting people. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I know a big component of energy audits is helping people understand their homes as a system and how they might prioritize the different recommendations that they're given. So what supporting mechanisms did you find really important to these audits?
So I'll go first, but Hugh might have it's just FaceTime. The auditors are really busy when they go on site, and they're very busy in the field. So they don't really have an opportunity to spend a lot of time with the customer very often. So we're finding the FaceTime is the critical time. Give the customers an easy report, an easy way to ask questions, and actually have a bit of a discussion on the retrofits being suggested, rather than just dropping a binder off on somebody's kitchen table and leaving, or sending them a paper report. The homeowner and the energy advisor can actually talk about the retrofits and what may be beneficial. And so it's really FaceTime that has the big impact. And we also believe that there's lots of opportunity for that concierge service. Today, these mechanisms are primarily for rebates. If we really boil it down, homeowners just want a rebate, but really we believe it could be more broadly used just for advice.
Yeah, well said. I don't really have anything to add to that, Winston, except to say that when Winston and I first started designing this research, back in 2019 or 18, even, Winston, I mean, that was the main sort of goal of this, and it wasn't even called remote audits, and at that time we called it like energy efficiency supply chain management or something, which is at the core, I think, of the question, meaning like, how do you connect homeowners with the information they need, and the contractors and the rebates, and what is the whole, like, it's such a confusing mix of, there's lots of rebates, and but it's such a confusing customer journey for homeowners right now, and it's very technical, and it's very, there's capacity constraints, and there's costs, and wading through all that is really what I think this concierge idea can really help with. So especially when we start getting into things like deep retrofit programming and the evolution from some of the, I guess, the easier upgrade stuff, but longer term doing, getting at those deep energy retrofits, I think the idea of concierge is going to be hugely important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a piece of feedback we see a lot. And just on that note, I am working in the background to put together a discovery session on different concierge programs across the country and how they are impacting different programs. So stay tuned for that one. Okay, so I think we've got time for one more question. We always run up against the constraints of time, unfortunately. So I'll pose this one and then we'll close the session for the day. Do we run the risk of making generalizations that don't apply to all homes? So for example, much older homes where fenestration isn't as much of an issue, but it's lacking wall insulation. Could you comment on that a little bit?
I can take this, and Winston, you can add on to it, but yeah, for sure, there is a risk of generalization, I think, and so that's why every home is unique. So it's important to have that off ramp for an energy advisor to be able to make the call that, hey, we need something deeper than we need a traditional audit based on what we're seeing here from an initial look from a remote audit. So that's a very good question, and something that I know everybody's concerned with. And yeah, but it's still a risk, even. It's still, that risk is there, admittedly, because if you don't do a traditional audit, you might, nothing is 100%. If an advisor doesn't recommend a traditional audit during that pathway, it could get missed, and that's when generalization could result in, it could be a risk. So you never be able to mitigate the risk 100%, I guess is what I'm saying. All we can do is put in as many controls as we can to reduce that risk as best we can.
Yeah, I think the only comment I would make is we recognized a while ago that archetypes or generalizations are not what homeowners necessarily want, because every single home has a path to low or zero carbon. And so that we made the conscious choice years ago that we're going to create a unique plan, a unique motion for every single home, and give that homeowner their own journey. Many programs today are designed with archetypes. And that is challenging because the archetypes are hard to give individual program advice for.
Amazing. Thank you both. I feel like you've given so many people food for thought, and we could probably spend a good 3 hours on this just chatting. So yet again, I apologize for the constraints of time, everyone. We are finished for today, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions. It sounds like there will be some follow-up though. And if you didn't have a chance to grab the QR code on the screen there, it sounds like you can get a demo of the product and talk a little bit more about the platform. I will also just note quickly that Jenny shared a link to the white paper in the chat. And I am going to be following this up with, I would say if you do want more detail, to go and check out that white paper. It sounds like it's quite a bit more robust than that, unfortunately, what we were able to present today. So again, thank you both so much for being here. This was wonderful. It was really great to learn about. I'm sure you're going to get lots of calls and questions in the future about this. The session was recorded, so we will post this on YouTube in about a week's time. So keep an eye out for that. It's on Efficiency Canada's YouTube channel. And I will invite you to the next discovery session as well. So we have the senior economist and head of business intelligence from BuildForce Canada. They just published a report on essentially the state of the labor market in the construction industry and what we're going to need to get to net zero. So that will be April 5th, and I encourage you to join us then. And thanks everyone for joining. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Allison.
Very much. Thanks for the questions.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. See ya.